spin on this. So my name is Emily Whitcomb, and I run our Fatigue Initiative here at the National Safety Council. Our goal with the Fatigue Initiative is really to educate employers on fatigue in the workplace, on sleep health, as well as drowsy driving. So we are going to have plenty of time for question and answer at the end of the presentation. Feel free to type any questions you may have into the Q&A box, and I will respond to them at the end. And hopefully we'll have some time left over as well where you guys can take that extra bit of time and check out some of the resources that I'll be talking about today. I'm sorry, just one second. There we go. It wasn't letting me advance my slides there for a minute. So people often ask me, what is fatigue? Fatigue describes feelings of tiredness, sleepiness, reduced energy, and increased effort needed to perform tasks at a desired level. So in the workplace, this could look like trouble focusing, yawning, sluggish behavior, decreased productivity, and I'm sure a lot of us have felt these types of feelings, have felt that tiredness, that sleepiness, and that reduced energy, because no human is immune to fatigue. It's just part of being human. It's one of those human factors that we just have to deal with. But many don't realize just how much fatigue affects our performance and our safety. So fatigue is an impairment that affects our productivity. Studies have shown that sleep problems reduce a worker's productivity by up to 6%. So for someone who gets less than 7 hours of sleep a night, they lose almost 4 days a year due to presenteeism. That's where they're present at work, but they're not as productive as they would be if they were completely alert. So for somebody with an untreated sleep disorder, for example, untreated insomnia, they can expect to lose about 11 days a year just due to presenteeism, again, meaning they're at work, but they're not necessarily functional. So losing 11 days a year for an untreated sleep disorder. So this really adds up for employers. But fatigue also affects our safety. A 2014 meta-analysis showed that 13% of workplace injuries could be attributed to sleep problems. So for those EHS managers out there, risk or safety managers, imagine identifying the cause of 13% of your workplace near misses, accidents, and injuries, and essentially we could be talking about fatigue as that risk factor. One way it affects our safety is when we're driving. So NHTSA has declared drowsy driving as a form of impaired driving. So they list the 4 Ds of impaired driving, being drunk, drugged, distracted, and drowsy driving. And drowsy driving is really a problem because people don't realize that you don't need to be completely sleep deprived to be at risk of drowsy driving. Just losing a few hours of sleep a night. If you're only sleeping 4 to 5 hours, you're 4 times more likely to crash. So just a few lost hours of sleep can really greatly increase your risk for a crash. And this is actually about the same crash risk as somebody with a .08 BAC that's legally intoxicated. And studies have actually shown that drunk driving is just as risky as drowsy driving. So a person who loses 2 hours of sleep a night performs similarly to somebody who has drank 3 beers. And because of that, a tired employee can be nearly as dangerous as an intoxicated employee. And that can be really hard to sort of wrap our heads around, right? Because we would never imagine getting on the road and driving while intoxicated. Drunk driving is just something that most people are not okay with. But we don't always think about the effects and the risks that we have getting on the roads if we're tired. The National Transportation Safety Board is a federal group that investigates crashes, often large fatal crashes, and they did a study where they compiled about 10 years of their accident investigations, and they found that 20% of their investigations identified fatigue as either a probable cause, a contributing factor, or a finding in the crashes. And then when they looked at types of crashes, they found that 40% of highway crashes that they investigated, fatigue was a contributing factor in them. So unfortunately, driving drowsy driving crashes are often underreported. It's really difficult to get accurate data for several reasons. It's not always captured on police reports. It's really hard for law enforcement to identify a drowsy driver. And usually when somebody's pulled over in a crash, they're not going to admit to drowsy driving. So it's often underreported. But a recent AAA Foundation study investigating the prevalence of drowsy driving, they estimated that 21% of fatal crashes involve a drowsy driver. So this is in contrast to the data we have from police reports, which hovers around 2.5% of crashes involve a drowsy driver. But again, this data is very much underreported. So we believe that AAA Foundation's estimate of 21% of crashes involve a drowsy driver is much more accurate. So why are we poor drivers when we're tired? Well, fatigue affects nearly all of our cognitive functioning. We have decreased attention, decreased vigilance, increased reaction time when we're tired, decreased impulse control. All of these things you don't want to have when you're behind the wheel and you're driving down the highway, right? But also, being tired, we can go into these what we call micro sleeps, which is essentially just nodding off. I mean, many of us have probably experienced that or seen somebody, nodding off, whether it's behind the wheel or just sitting on the couch at night at the end of the day. And really a micro sleep is when your brain kind of goes offline and you involuntarily fall asleep. So these are usually really short, unintended sleep episodes. But when you're behind the wheel and this happens, it can be very dangerous. So let's talk about the causes of fatigue and drowsy driving. And there are several causes of fatigue in the workplace specifically. There's sleep loss, circadian rhythm misalignment, and worker task demands that can contribute to fatigue. Sleep loss is a major cause of fatigue, and there's a lot of reasons why somebody may not be getting 7 hours of sleep every day like they should. Maybe they're not prioritizing sleep. Maybe they choose to stay up late and watch TV. Maybe they're caring for a baby or an elderly parent. Some people may struggle to get sleep because of their work schedule, and others may have sleep disorders. So 50 to 70 million people in the United States live with a sleep disorder, but they are largely undiagnosed and untreated. So the Institutes of Medicine estimate that about 90% of sleep disorders are undiagnosed and untreated. And a lot of time that's because people don't realize that they have a sleep disorder. So we're actually working with employers to try and increase awareness of sleep disorders, what that looks like, how people can be screened and be treated. And what we would like to see is sleep health programs implemented in more workplaces, and we are going to talk about that in a little bit. Another cause of fatigue in the workplace is circadian rhythm misalignment. And this simply refers to being awake when your body wants to be asleep, like during the nighttime, and then trying to sleep when your body wants to be awake. So the period between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. is when our bodies are pumping out the most melatonin. This is a hormone that tells us to go to sleep. So in aviation, they call this 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. window the window of circadian low, and that's when we experience the most performance effects and the most safety effects due to misalignment. Well, because of our 24-hour society, we have a lot of operations that have to work during the nighttime. Manufacturing, transportation are big ones that require night shift schedules. And this is a huge risk factor for fatigue because it's really hard for those workers to be alert and active during this time period, but then also they really struggle to get sleep during the daytime hours because their body just does not want to sleep during the day. So it's a major problem for them. So while there's biological causes of fatigue, like the sleep loss and the circadian rhythm misalignment, there's also environmental causes that can contribute to fatigue and prohibit workers from getting enough sleep. So someone's job and the tasks that they do can cause them to accumulate fatigue, and then there's organizational and operational factors that can contribute to fatigue as well. So I'll share one of those that's relative to transportation. So we call it time on task fatigue. So the type of job or task someone has can contribute to their fatigue. And that's, humans really aren't great at sustaining a task for a long period of time, boring or monotonous, unstimulating tasks can often unmask sleepiness. And one example of this is highway hypnosis. So if you've ever driven down a long, boring, maybe dimly lit highway road, you tend to just get a little dazed and you kind of tune out a little bit. And we call that time on task fatigue. But then on the other side of the scale, we have really mentally demanding tasks. If you try and do something that requires a lot of concentration, a lot of brain power for an extended period of time, it really, really drains our batteries. So these are examples of time on task fatigue. But people also have issues with long hours during the day. Long work weeks can be huge risk factors for fatigue. And we have some examples of those on a report we have on our website that I'll talk about shortly, but it's at nsc.org/tired-at-work-report if you want to check this out. So we know that fatigue affects our performance. We know it affects our safety, but not everyone realizes just how widespread fatigue is. Last year, we surveyed about 2,000 working Americans on fatigue in the workplace. We asked them about 9 different risk factors for fatigue, such as long shifts, long work hours, their commuting time back and forth to work, if they're shift workers, those sorts of risk factors. And we found that nearly every worker we surveyed reported at least one risk factor for fatigue. And we were really astonished to see just how prevalent these risk factors were in the workplace. But even more surprising, we found that 80% of our survey respondents reported more than one risk factor for fatigue. Another surprising finding from that survey is that 43% of American workers, that's almost half our workforce, are not getting at least 7 hours of sleep a day, which means that they are likely chronically sleep deprived. So sleep loss and sleep deprivation is one of the biggest causes of fatigue, as we talked a little bit earlier. So we've really been conditioned as a society to believe that sleep is not important. It's something that you'll do when you're dead. I'm sure most of us have heard that saying. Sleep is usually the first thing that we cut off our to-do list at the end of the day if we have what seems like more important things to do. It almost feels like a luxury more than a necessity in our culture. And we often hear in the workplace people joke that if you prioritize sleep, if you're not working long hours, then maybe you're lazy or just not a hard worker. But we're finding more and more every day, research is finding just how important sleep is for our health and our safety and the safety of those around us. So in this survey I was talking about, we also found that people are literally falling asleep unintentionally. So 27% of workers in our survey are falling asleep on the job within the past month. Could you imagine a quarter of your workforce falling asleep while working in the past month, especially if they're working in some safety-sensitive industry? That's really concerning. 16% of workers have fallen asleep while driving in the past month. 41% of workers have fallen asleep unintentionally in the past month. And going back to drowsy driving, it occurs far more frequently than anyone would like to see, especially as safety professionals. And our study asked about falling asleep while driving, and we found that 16% admitted to falling asleep while driving in the past month. But there's other estimates out there. National Sleep Foundation asked if they had fallen asleep while driving in the past year, and almost 40% of drivers have admitted to falling asleep behind the wheel in the past year. AAA Foundation also did a recent poll. They asked if the participant had ever fallen asleep behind the wheel in all of their driving lifetime. 43% of Americans admitted to falling asleep while driving at some point in their lifetime. And again, this is really concerning. People are literally falling asleep while driving. As most of us know, driving is one of the most dangerous things you'll do during the day. So just imagine, people driving on the highway 65, 75 miles per hour, and they are dozing off. It's really scary. So with productivity and performance issues, safety issues, employers may not realize how expensive it is to have tired employees and how much they could save by managing fatigue in their workplace. So sleep problems are expensive. A single employee with an untreated sleep disorder who sleeps less than 7 hours a day costs an employer about $3,500 a year. So an employer with about 700 employees can expect to pay $1 million a year just to sustain those employees. And most of us don't have the budget for that. So we're really trying to work with employers to address that. And if you want to look at what that looks like in your workplace, you can visit our calculator at nsc.org/tired-at-work to get an estimate of how much fatigue is costing you in your workplace. So let's shift into what can an employer do. And it really requires a multifaceted approach. And we like to talk about fatigue risk management as part of a safety management system. And it's important to recognize that fatigue can be managed both at home and in the workplace. So a fatigue risk management system includes policies, practices, programs, and procedures that incorporate fatigue risk management into an already existing safety system. And really the purpose of it is to minimize factors that cause fatigue in order to control those health and safety risks in the workplace. So one way to do that is with sleep health, education, and screening. So this would include information on why sleep is important, how to get better sleep, to really try and empower employees to prioritize sleep. But it also includes a sleep disorder screening where the employee can do a short self-assessment, completely anonymous, and then find out if they're at risk for a sleep disorder. And then with that information, we would hope that they would follow up with the doctor and get treated for a sleep disorder. You can also manage fatigue risk by implementing science-based policies and practices, such as effective shift scheduling practices that would ensure that employees are able to get enough rest during the day, that their work hours or their work schedule isn't impeding their ability to get proper rest and show up to work fit for duty. If you have questions about shift scheduling practices, we actually have a nice fact sheet on our website that you can check out. Okay. You can also manage fatigue risk by nurturing a culture of safety and a culture where fatigue is understood as a hazard, where employees don't feel pushed to the brink to work more hours, where they feel comfortable telling their supervisor that they're too tired to drive safely. Employers can also manage fatigue by educating their employees, not only on sleep health, but also on risk factors in the workplace, how their commute factors into it, if they're starting work really early in the morning or really late at night. Education helps create a positive culture. And then data collection, incident reporting, and continuous improvement. So collect the data about the work site and about fatigue risk. Ask fatigue-related questions on incident reporting. So if there is an incident, document how many hours into the shift that employee was or how many hours they've worked that week. Monitor and track the hours worked. And then you can use that information to identify any hazards. Maybe you have some extra long shifts that are you're starting to see that there's more incidents or more near misses on a particular shift schedule. You need to collect that information, though, to kind of see those trends and improve your shift scheduling practices. So we have a ton of resources available on our website at nsc.org/fatigue kit. We have fact sheets, we have infographics, we have posters for you all. One thing I'd like you to check out is our newest white paper that we put out, and this really goes more in depth to what I was talking about today, the causes and consequences of fatigue in the workplace. You can find that at nsc.org/tired-at-work report. So I'm happy to take any questions. Feel free to type them into the chat box. I'd also love to hear from you if there's any resources that you would like that so that we could create them for you, if there's any specific information you're looking for. And with the time left over, if you want to check out our cost calculator, you can find that at nsc.org/tired-at-work. All right, so I'm going to wait for any questions. And if you think of something later, feel free to shoot me an email at emily.whitcomb@nsc.org. And I think you're all unmuted, so if you don't feel like typing and you want to just go ahead and shoot me a question, I should be able to hear you. All right, well, if you think of anything after the presentation, please feel free and shoot me an email. Let me know if there's any resources that would be helpful for you if you have any questions, or if you have any fatigue-related stories to tell me, any best practices you're implementing in the workplace. I love to hear from you all. My purpose here on the Fatigue Initiative is to assist employers in addressing this issue in the workplace, so I love hearing from you. So thank you all for joining me here today.
Thank you, Emily. I think the resources you gave us are really helpful and powerful. We appreciate you being with us today, and we greatly appreciate the information you've shared. Hopefully this will help employers keep employees safer. We appreciate attendees taking a few minutes to complete the post-event survey. And with that, this concludes the webinar. Have a great day.